Welcome, sleepless spirit. I'm your storyteller tonight, here to guide you gently into the shadows of slumber, where dreams take over and worries fade away. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more bedtime tales, whispered just for you. Let me know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it as you listen tonight? And if there's a story you've been longing to hear, something spooky, something comforting, tell me. I'm always listening. Now, tuck yourself in. Let the darkness wrap around you like a warm blanket. It's time to let go and drift into the story. Greetings, drowsy spirit. Tonight, I will tell you a story that will help you fall asleep soundly. Remember to subscribe for more bedtime stories and like the video before we start. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in the comments section. I would also love to know what story you would want to hear next. I was born in Iron Hill, a little unnamed town nestled in Nebraska's southeast, where everyone knows everyone, all believes they do, and grain grows taller than most people. I lived in that town for 18 years. Only 2 things ever happened in all that time that really rocked it. Of course, my birth was the first. You're welcome. Well, the second point is that because tiny towns bury their monsters with their secrets, one of the tragedies was the kind you don't hear about in the papers. And wait if you find that overwrought. This story isn't about ghosts. This has nothing to do with something scuttling out of the forest. What occurs when a little, typical town produces something that it is unaware of until it is too late is the subject of this story. I was a freshman in high school, and it was October. I recall that although the decorations for Halloween were up, no one had yet put on coats. Iron Hill was dead silent on Sundays. You could hardly see a car on the streets after church and family dinners. After supper, my friends and I would ride our bikes about town, taking in the final of the daytime. Nathan, Troy, and Emily were biking with me that Sunday. Ryan Carson, a child from our class, came hurtling down the hill on his bike, if his life depended on it, as we were making our way down Saddlehorn Avenue. The Holloway's garage is on fire. Everyone. There was no need for more. We watched the smoke curl into the sky like an ash tornado, as tires screeched around curves behind Ryan. The Holloway house's whole backyard was lighting orange. It filled the garage. People were already being pushed back by police. The firemen were shouting. Before we could even get a glimpse, one of the officers said, "Back up." Everyone returned. A pop was heard, followed by a string of them. Whoa, whoa, whoa. The firefighters fled after dropping their hoses. I will never ignore that. These were mature, well-trained, and extremely composed guys who fled a blazing garage like children frightened of fireworks. We didn't hold out. Our bikes were becoming too slow, so we rushed home. The sky had turned pink from the flames, and I only remember looking back once. There was a lot of talk about it. There was someone inside, they said. Today, Kevin Holloway failed to appear at school. No, he wasn't the one. It might have been his uncle. The Holloway family was large. Kevin lived with his grandparents and had 2 brothers and a younger sister. It was difficult to determine who might have been in that garage evening on Tuesday morning. However, we were free to stop guessing. All of us gathered in the gym. The principal, Mr. Halfman, was pale, so you knew it was serious. Not even Coach Garber chewed his gum, as he always did. Sheriff Mallory and 2 deputies stood in the front of the gym. Everyone fell hushed as he moved forward and removed his hat. "People," he began, "I'm sorry to inform you that we lost one of our own, but I know you've all heard about the fire that occurred at the Holloway property on Sunday night." He stopped when he saw it was Kevin. "Right now," the sheriff added, "we're trying to understand what happened." Girls gasped, while a few of the guys merely looked. You could feel the oxygen leave the gym. "We want to know whether anyone here knew Kevin. Please come talk to us if you have noticed anything strange about him recently. Not in this place. Call, but not right now. Make contact." The emotion changed at that point. Not yet. Not with grief, perplexity. Why were we being asked to tell the police about Kevin? A fire had claimed his life. That was plenty, wasn't it? Apparently not. By Wednesday, there were rumors circulating. Kevin was manufacturing fireworks, according to someone, and one of them went off. Another person said that the fire was an accident, and that his older brother had become involved in drug use. But it wasn't until Thursday night that we all truly knew. Iron Hill held one of its well-known town meetings around the time. You are aware of the type. Pictures of lemonade, folding chairs at the recreation facility, and everyone they filed in, whispering. I was not invited. My folks went. I was expected to take out the garbage and complete my assignments. Nor did I before I heard the garage door rumble open. I was playing GoldenEye. I knew something wasn't right when they entered. That's how my dad seemed the night my uncle was killed in a car accident. My mother sat down as if she had been kicked out of her breath. Sit. Did I do something? I asked my father. Number Kevin is the subject of this. They filled me in on everything. Kevin had not burned his garage by accident. He had been constructing a bomb. It went off when he was putting it together, and he had been following directions he obtained online. The garage blew up. Only the blast caused the rest of the house to catch fire. His younger sibling had been watching television indoors. Only because the living room was on the opposite side of the house did he live. The bit that stuck in my throat 4 days was then revealed to me. Kevin had put everything in writing. A spiral notepad that was partially charred was present. They discovered what was left of his workbench underneath. It outlined everything. On Veterans Day, he intended to construct a functional bomb and bury it beneath St. Lucas Church. The majority of the community would have been there, with over 100 people. He had no specific goal in mind. All he wanted to do was harm others. By now, my mother was crying once more. My father merely gazed at the wall. Half the town would have been destroyed by him. According to Dad, he would have done it. The thing is this, Kevin didn't live alone. Not precisely. He wasn't bullied, but he was quiet. He avoided conflicts. He occasionally chuckled at silly jokes while seated in the second row of Spanish class. He wasn't someone I liked, yet I didn't despise him. He simply existed. Hence, when individuals began expressing opinions, such as he always seemed a little off, or he didn't smile enough, I didn't buy it. They were merely attempting to explain something that didn't make sense. Although someone spilled enough, the police wouldn't give us anything that was in the journal. He was talking about Colleen, claimed to understand those men, declared he's one to be remembered. I sometimes wake up in the middle of the night, thinking what may have occurred if the fuse hadn't blown early. Would I be here any longer? Would anyone? 6 weeks later, the Holloway family left. By April, the home had been demolished. They created Holloway Field, a park, on the lot. The name is no longer spoken. For 2 months, a school counselor visited us once a week. No one spoke to her. For a period, some children made crude comments about Kevin. No charges were brought against Troy, after he decked someone in the lunchroom for stating, "Guess Holloway got his wish." 19 years have passed. I presently reside in Denver. There are still Iron Hills. It's still silent. The cafe still serves cinnamon buns larger than your hand. And the community is still the type where people wave from the porch. But I remember every Veterans Day. I recall that garage catching fire, as if hell itself had exploded. The sound of the firefighters fleeing is still in my mind. I recall realizing that a child I had taken Spanish class with attempted to murder everyone I had ever met and had only succeeded by accident. Horror isn't always what you see. Horror is what nearly occurred sometimes. And the event that didn't happen was the worst thing that ever happened in Iron Hill, Nebraska. Being employed at a mortuary was never my dream job. The plan just did not include that kind of work. But when life falls apart, plans don't really matter. I came to Wexler Ridge, a little town in northern Missouri, 3 years ago. The majority of the residents are retirees, truckers, and farmers. It's the sort of location where strangers who have never talked to one another wave. I had no acquaintances. That was the idea. Nate Carver is my name. I came here to vanish, to escape the cacophony of St. Louis and the recollection of my fiance's death in the collision. She was behind the wheel. I was in the passenger seat. I made it through. She didn't. It is impossible to bury a loved one without feeling as though a piece of yourself has perished. I was hired as a night attendant at Hollowbrook Mortuary, thanks to a family friend. It was simple, peaceful task that involved only paperwork, logging, simple preparation, and upkeep of the cooler. Mr. Landry, the proprietor, was amiable but aloof. He was most likely in his 70s and largely ignored me. I was okay with that. It was just me, the dead, and silence for the first 6 months. Then, in October of last year, I opened the cooler at the beginning of my shift, as usual, and I noticed that I was sleeping inside. Initially, I chuckled. Perhaps the loneliness and the night shift had finally worn me down, I thought. It wasn't a hallucination, though. I wasn't the only person who looked like me. It was my face. Even the small freckle on my collarbone, the chipped tooth I have had since junior high, and the thin scar on my right brow. The typical white morgue sheet was on it. It had a blank tag around its toe. I went to the intake log. Nothing. I checked again. There were no fresh corpses. 2 days have passed since the last registered entry. A tray of embalming equipment fell to the floor as I backed away slowly and bumped into the prep counter. I made no phone calls. Who should I call? What could I possibly say? Landry, hello. In the cooler is a deceased version of myself. Would you be able to come down here and look? Correct. I therefore took the only action I knew how to do. The body was processed by me. I gave it a shave. I cleaned it. I witnessed it turn to ash after inserting it into the retort. The entire time, my hands were shaking. I swept up the remnants and disposed of them in the standard container without labeling or sealing them. The idea of me sitting on a shelf was too much for me to handle. That morning I didn't get any sleep. I convinced myself that it was a stress dream that I had created while I gazed at the ceiling, but I couldn't get the image out of my thoughts. And he was back when I opened the cooler the following evening. Same blank tote tag, same dead eyes, same myself. It continued. At first, it happened once every few days, but eventually it happened every night. My own lifeless face looked back at me every time I opened the cooler, its skin gradually changing. On certain occasions, he wore my old college haircut. He once had a black eye, which I hadn't had in more than 10 years. I attempted to find out if there were any security cameras at night from Landry. No, he responded. He never saw the purpose of it, because it was an old building and the utilities and maintenance costs were high. I felt like screaming. I began recording my observations in a journal, taking notes. On certain evenings, the corpse's face shifted, with one eye partially open and a twisted smile. I swear the thing blinked one night. I started to leave the body undisturbed, hoping that Landry or the day crew would notice, but they never did. No questions, no notes. I then started testing it. Once under the surgical lamp, I left it on the prep table. Gone the following evening. Fresh once again in the cooler. On another occasion, I used a scalpel to make a tiny cut behind its ear. There was a small slit, yet it was something familiar. When I looked in the mirror the following evening, I saw the identical cut, there, but not deep, similar to a subtle scar I couldn't recall receiving. The following night, I slept with the lights on and called in sick. Someone knocked on my door in my dream. 2 sets of muddy footsteps appeared on my porch when I woke up. It has been days since I was outside. A year went by. A whole, gloomy, terrible year of burning myself alive almost every night. I ceased dating and interacting with others. Between shifts, I ate instant noodles, watched the shadows extend across my ceiling, and stopped being myself. I eventually settled into a pattern. Open the cooler, go inside the mortuary, look for him, ignore him, and complete the paperwork. I always burned him by myself if he was present, but I was unable to accomplish it one night. I sobbed more than I had since the burial as I looked at the body, my body, his body, whatever the hell it was, and slid against the chilly tile floor. I left it there after that, simply shut the cooler and left. The following evening, the cooler was empty when I got back, expecting chaos, an investigation, or anything. There was no duplicate for the first time since that first terrifying experience. I burst out laughing. I performed a dance. I assumed it was finished. I was mistaken. It began again, but in a different way. I discovered a bruise on my jaw while I was brushing my teeth in front of the mirror. I don't recall receiving one. Then, from behind the ear, I saw the scar. It was redder, fresher, and more agitated now. When I opened the cooler at work the following evening, I saw myself once more. Not dead, though. This was me, breathing shallowly, eyes wide, chest hardly rising. He was conscious but not moving. His eyes were far away and hollow. I slammed the cooler shut in a panic. I puked by the dumpster as I dashed out into the pitch-black parking lot. I didn't return that evening. The cooler was once more empty when I got back the next evening. He came to knock on my door 2 weeks later. Rain was falling. Through the woods, the wind howled. And he was there, wet, standing in my clothing, in the light from my porch. Not just ones that are comparable. Mine, the bleach-staining hoodie, the jeans that had a torn pocket. With my heart racing, I gazed through the peephole. He waited without saying anything, staring, quiet. With trembling hands, I retrieved the bat from beneath my bed, backed away, and dialed 911. He was gone when I looked again. No one was found by the police. The doorbell cam showed nothing but static, and there were no tracks in the dirt. At last, I told Landry everything. Silently, he listened. He then proceeded to the rear of the embalming room, opened a drawer, and took out a thick, old-looking folder. There were old morgue journals, notes, and pictures within. He presented them as if they were confessions. He answered, "You're not the first. Both my father and his experienced it. Since the 1890s, our families have operated Hollowbrook. It finds one of us in every generation." "What is it?" With a shaky breath, I asked. He gave a head shake. "No origin, no name. Just a reflection that begins to appear, a pattern. It tries to replace you, the first being dead, and then living. If you don't allow it to, it can't really exist. How do I put an end to it?" He lowered his voice to a whisper. "Give it no more food." So I paused. No more cremations. No more acknowledgement. He was in the cooler by my roadside window, and I ignored him. Sometimes he would wait and watch outside. I saw him standing by my side once, mailbox, and simply passed him if he hadn't been there, and he faded after a few weeks. The bruises disappeared. The scar became lighter. Up until last week, I felt like a human again, slumped over the desk in his office. Landry was discovered dead. They stated it was heart failure. Additionally, the cooler was open when I got to work yesterday night. There was more than one version of me inside. 3 of them stared, each with a unique expression. One grinning, one furious, and one depressed. The door is locked. I turned off the phone. The peaceful hum of the cooler and the embalming fluid surround me as I write this by hand. I am aware that you are never allowed to leave this town. In some maps, Hollowbrook is not shown. People go there in order to vanish. They are unaware, however, that something is waiting here to occupy the gap they have left. There are no second chances for you. You simply get swapped out. Tell someone I tried if they find this. I resisted it. However, the third person's smile tonight seemed too certain, too genuine. I no longer believe that I am the original. The cooler is beckoning, too. I initially relocated to Sycamore Ridge in search of tranquility. After 33 years as a corrections officer in the state prison, that was all I truly desired. Calm, not very fancy. Just somewhere I could sit with a cup of coffee on my porch in the morning and listen to birds, rather than metal doors slamming and keys jangling. I had witnessed far too many fights, suicides, and other things that I couldn't ignore. After I submitted my badge and received my pension, I informed for myself I would locate a peaceful area of Missouri and never turn around. That peaceful nook resembled Sycamore Ridge. It was a quiet town with about 1,000 residents, around 2.5 hours away from where I used to live. To reach there, you had to drive past countless soy fields on a tiny 2-lane road, and it was like going back 30 years when you did. There was a post office the size of a shed, a cafe that served breakfast all day, and the solitary petrol station with 2 pumps. Nor were the homes stereotypical suburbs. The majority were vintage ranch-style homes with deep driveways and expansive yards from the 1960s or earlier. At the end of Sycamore Lane, I purchased one. Yellow siding, 2 bathrooms, 3 bedrooms, and a tiny deck in the back. The bones were nice, but needed some TLC and some paint. According to the realtor, it had been vacant for a few years following the death of the former owner. I didn't inquire, and she didn't say anything else. During the first few days, we settled in, unpacked, stocked up on basic tools from the neighborhood hardware store, planned garbage days, and other tasks. I largely remained to myself, but I would nod to neighbors when I saw them. I wasn't used to chit-chatting, not after being schooled to remain vigilant for decades. The town felt welcoming enough, albeit reticent. Many people appeared to be elderly. I saw very few children playing in yards. Few spoke for very long, but everyone waved. On the 5th night, that was different. Someone knocked on my door at about 6:30. When I opened it, I saw a man in his 50s, clean-shaven, with a clipboard in his hand, a slight tummy, and a flannel shirt tucked in. "Evening," he said, smiling briefly. "It's Marvin. I am a member of the neighborhood patrol organization that we have established. Greetings from the ridge." "Thank you," I said. "Moved in last week." "Yes, I saw the U-Haul," he nodded. "Anyway, I thought I would drop by and update you on our watch. Just a few of us who monitor things, nothing official. At night, we alternately drive around the neighborhoods to make sure nothing amusing is happening. It's generally very quiet in a tiny town like this, but you know, it's better safe than sorry." I paused. "Do you people really see a lot of trouble?" He gave a shrug. "Occasionally, we escape from town people looking around vacant homes. Some areas on the outskirts of town are populated by squatters, or worse. Sometimes it's drug stuff, but usually it's simply being seen." Maintained silence. The clipboard caught my attention. "Do you require volunteers?" "It wouldn't be harmful. You only work 1 shift per week, midnight until 3 in the morning. Patrol the designated loop. We provide you a map and a reflective vest. Not required to leave the vehicle or do nothing. We watch, document, and remain secure." I stopped. There wasn't much else going on for me. "Okay," I replied. "I'm on board." Marvin grinned broadly. "Thank you, Jim. I take it that's your name." I hadn't informed him. I nodded nonetheless. "Yes, Jim, my first shift was that Friday night." I had the map Marvin had given me, a red thermos full of coffee, and an old playlist of classic music on low. I traveled 5 streets, all of which had quiet, tree-lined alleys and were primarily residential. I just did laps while driving slowly and with my headlights dimmed. There was still some lights on the porch. One man in a robe out early to pick up his paper. Another waved casually at me while he walked his dog. It was soothing, almost like watching over a world that no longer felt hostile. Weeks went by with the same pattern. Nothing ever took place. The club met at the community center once a month. Not much, bad coffee, and a bunch of plastic chairs. Meetings were run by Marvin. Additionally, there was a tall, stiff man named Earl, who mainly observed people without saying anything, and a woman named Carol, who took attendance in a manner similar to that of a teacher. They stated the same thing every time. Remain in the vehicle. Don't get involved. Any unexpected activity should be reported. Marvin used to remark, "Think of yourselves like the eyes and ears, not the hands." Until the night everything changed. Everything appeared to be normal enough. It was a Wednesday evening in late October, sufficiently cold that before I could begin my journey, my windshield needed to be scraped. Approximately 2:05 a.m. One of the furthest streets in my loop was Brook Hollow, which I was traveling down. Out there were more trees than houses, and some of the houses appeared to have been abandoned. Broken mailboxes, overgrown yards, and the like that are left forgotten. I noticed them at that point. One of the 2 males was crouching close to the side door of a small, deserted-looking house with peeling grey paint and crooked blinds. Something, most likely a crowbar, was being used by the man. The door gave in a matter of seconds after he pried at the frame. The other man emerged from behind the home, scanning the area before sneaking inside. No rush, no masks. They acted as if they were aware that no one was looking. I felt sick to my stomach. I got out of the car and grabbed my phone. My rear view was flooded with headlights before I could open the screen. A truck that is black. I hadn't seen it coming and hadn't heard it. The truck came to a stop right behind me. 3 men left. One had a flashlight in his hand. One was holding a heavy object. They approached me carefully, as if they weren't rushing. The tallest one lightly knocked on my window. I didn't lower it, did not even look me in the eye. I slammed the car into drive and accelerated. I recoiled as I heard a loud crack against my rear window. I didn't pause to look until I reached Main Street. I simply continued to drive, taking detours. Nobody trailed behind. I looked at my mirror once more at the next red light. The truck has vanished. I felt a spiderweb fracture in the glass as I stretched back, my hands shaking. However, I wasn't particularly frightened by that. As I drove away, I saw that face. The man watching me from the truck. He had no mask on. He didn't conceal anything. He played his day while standing beneath a street lamp. Marvin was the one. I didn't get any sleep. Until daybreak, I sat in my kitchen in the dark. 9 a.m. I made a call to the sheriff's office. A deputy would stop by sometime today. The dispatcher, who sounded half-tired, informed me. A young man arrived at about 11 o'clock. Early 30s, courteous, in uniform. I reported what I witnessed to him. The vehicle, the men, the break-in, and my car's damage. At first, I didn't give Marvin a name, just described everything in detail to him. He appeared quite bored. That house has been empty a while, he stated. Might have just been the owners or someone checking it out, I replied. The time was 2 a.m. they got in. He gave a shrug. We occasionally receive calls like that, unless someone reports missing stuff. It isn't technically a burglary, because no one lives there. I gazed at him. You're not going to look it up? Then, he drummed on his notebook. I will submit the report, should there be time. We will stop by. I took a deep breath. Do you know that the neighborhood watch is run by Marvin? Yes, good man. Been in existence for a long time. I nearly said something. Nearly, however. I didn't. Everything changed after that day. Carol stopped texting me back. When I saw Earl at the diner, he turned away. No more invitations to meetings. No more shifts reminders. I felt as though I had been silently removed. The following week, Marvin passed my house 3 times while softly whistling. After he waved, I didn't return the wave. One afternoon, I noticed the black truck sitting 2 streets away, idle. A few hours later, it was gone when I passed by. My real neighbor, Doug, began cutting his grass at night. It's late enough to convey a message, but not late enough to be against the law. I mounted a camera over the porch, acquired sturdier locks, closed the blinds, and kept to myself, yet the camera kept disconnecting. When I called the sheriff again, they consistently promised to follow up, but they never did. A dead squirrel was left in my mailbox one evening, just blood and fur and silence, with no note. I heard gravel crunching outside as I woke up one more night. 3 figures were standing at the end of my driveway when I peered through the blinds. They did not approach. They didn't knock. They merely waited while standing there. What's going on in Sycamore Ridge is unknown to me. I'm not sure if it's illicit property sales, drug trafficking, or something else entirely. This is what I do know. The neighborhood watch does not keep an eye out for illicit activity. The criminals are them. They ride around seeming to be safe, use the watch as cover, and look for unattended or vacant houses. They are aware that no one will look into them. Everyone is in on it. So the town looks the other way while they break in and take what they want. The man who sold me this house, the sheriff, the deputy, and possibly even the owner of the cafe. I have yet to leave Sycamore Ridge. Moving would have allowed them to win, but I should have. Or perhaps it indicates that they follow me around. In any case, I know they're watching, but I've also started to watch, so I now turn off the lights when I sleep. When we left everything behind, I was 17, before the ink on our diplomas had dried. My cousin Molly and I had just graduated from high school and were crammed into the back of my uncle's beat-up Chevy while we watched the cityscape of our hometown fade away in the distance. We had nothing to flee from. We were sprinting for something, a fresh start, a new life. Look, my youngest Aunt Charlotte was married to a man who had a dairy farm in Fairhill, Texas, which is a remote area. He needed help, she said, and in some way, that little desire became a huge migration. Our entire family, including grandparents, cousins, uncles, and aunts, arrived in Fairmill like a caravan. We planted them even if our routes didn't go that far. Stop signs were more common than stoplights in Fairmill, and everyone you passed waved to ask whether they knew you or not. And by next Sunday, the majority of them would have known you. The air smelled of lovely hay and dirt, but it was dusty and dry, and the sound of cows lowing was transported by the breeze like a faraway lullaby when the wind was blowing just right. Daniel, my father, had spent his entire life farming. Like the everlasting tan on his neck, the creases on his worn face, dirt under his nails, was just another aspect of him. He was immediately accepted by the other men in the town, but no one matched him as well as he did with Rocky Thompson. Rocky moved like a man 20 years younger than his actual age of 50. Every day he wore the same threadbare overalls, with a dust-covered cap that never seemed to get off his head, and one strap always undone. Even with his nearly petrified footwear, he could still outrun you, or a foot race across a field. I had never met a man who could labor as hard as that one. He wasn't ostentatious, and only spoke when he had something important to say. However, he was the type of man who would arrive at 4 o'clock in the morning, to pretend to cook a pie at dinner, while continuing to assist you fixing your broken tractor. He was well known in Fairhill. He was liked by most people. He was owed by some. He was like a brother to my dad. They quickly became partners. At the dairy first, then elsewhere. They began their own wild game after the dairy closed. Processing company, Rayner and Thompson Gameworks, in a village where the deer season was revered more than Sunday services. It was a big hit. They had a unique bond. They were laughing about something only they knew, while sitting against a truck bed in the fields and enjoying a thermos of scorched black coffee. They shared a calm friendship that doesn't require regular communication, anything profound, but on a Tuesday afternoon, everything fell apart. Angela, my stepmother, worked as an EMT. As part of the pattern, she visited Rocky's apartment once a week to replenish his weekly pill organizer. Years ago, he had experienced some minor heart issues, but he always dismissed them. As usual, she let herself in that day. She discovered him clutching his chest on the kitchen floor. She made an effort. God, she tried everything, radioed in backup, CPR, everything. Rocky, however, had already left. The burial was reminiscent of a Southern Gothic book. The Fairmill Baptist Church, the only one in town large enough to accommodate everyone, served as the venue. They arrived in large numbers, including churchgoers, hunting partners, former football teammates, and every farmer within 100 miles. There was anguish and heat in the air. With his hands gripped tightly in his lap, my dad's expression was unreadable as he sat rigidly in the front pew. Even when we buried my grandma, I had never witnessed him cry. However, something inside of him cracked that day when they carried Rocky's coffin outside in the blazing heat. For an instant, he appeared older than I had ever seen him, and silent tears streamed down his cheeks. Then everything began to fall apart. Rocky's relatives, individuals we had never even met, began to arrive and inquire about money, land, and equipment. Tension in the town, legal threats, and debates were all present. The business slowed down. Despite his best efforts, my dad was clearly feeling the effects of it. His eyes lost their vitality. Mornings arrived more slowly. The giggling ceased. I then had the dream roughly 6 weeks following the burial. It wasn't your typical dream. Not in the typical sense of the word. No, I wasn't acting, talking, or moving. All I did was observe. The image was so vivid that it seemed more real than reality. A vast, open field with golden wheat blowing in the wind against an incredibly blue sky. It is the type of setting that can only be found in memories or images, and Rocky was there. However, he wasn't who I remembered. He appeared to be in his 30s. He had thick, sun-kissed blonde hair without a hat. He was dressed in brand new pants and a crisp blue shirt that was buttoned all the way up. His boots appeared brand new, with one hand resting on a wooden fence post, as if he had just finished erecting it. He was leaning against it. The wind was the only sound. Nevertheless, I heard him, or perhaps I simply comprehended him. His words were, "I'm okay. I made it. I'm home," he said, grinning before fading into the field like smoke on. We sat under the ancient pecan tree behind the home, drinking iced tea and watching the sky turn purple with dark. A year went by. I woke up with wet cheeks and an odd sense of serenity, but I didn't tell anyone yet. The cicadas screamed as usual, and we were exchanging stories, mostly about Rocky, since that's what we were doing now. I told him everything because I felt it was time. And at first he didn't say anything, just stared off into space as if he was trying to visualize it. Then he looked at me slowly, and "I never had a dream like that," he remarked. I nodded. Dad took a deep breath. His fingers trembled when he wiped his eyes. He always knew what I needed before I did. I believe Rocky came to me because he knew I would wait until you needed to hear it. I'm not into ghosts, signs, or anything like that, so I don't profess to comprehend what happened, but I know deep down that the dream wasn't a dream. It didn't happen to start something or to frighten me. Years have gone by, and Dad is back to working the land, albeit slowly, steadily. The gaming plant eventually shut down, but he doesn't complain. It happened to end something, to close the wound, to say farewell. I swear, every now and then, when the wheat is high and the wind is just right, I can smell that faint dusty scent, like overalls and old boots and something stronger. He kept Rocky's cap and hung it over the corner of his shop's doorway. It's dusty, sun-bleached, and fraying at the edges. Rocky only ever reappeared in a dream once, but that was sufficient because now, when my dad and I discuss him, there is both pain and peace. It's possible to cure everything broken, but sometimes you simply have to let go. And in a tiny town with golden wheat and peaceful fields, that's enough. That's home. I was 15 years old the spring it happened, and I lived in the type of town where nothing ever truly happens. Gallows Hill, Nebraska, is the kind of place where people still leave their doors unlocked, and where the church bulletin gets passed around like it's breaking news. One main road split the town in half, with a grocery store, 2 diners, and a gas station that hadn't changed its layout since before I was born. The last time I checked, it had 872 residents, and that was back in 1998. It may have fewer people now. As an only child, I relied on my friends for entertainment when I could locate them. We didn't have cable until I was 10 years old, and we were too poor to get the internet. There was no movie theater, arcade, or more within 40 miles. Fortunately, I had 2 solid ones, Tara Doyle and Leo Matson, who lived on the same section of Burwood Avenue, a winding road just outside the tiny center of town. And we were all in the same grade. Tara had moved to town in the 8th grade from somewhere in Iowa, and Leo and I had known each other since we were toddlers, as his mom ran the daycare and our families were close. We liked the outdoors, so we had to spend our weekends hiking the trails behind Leo's house, cutting across the woods, and exploring the old grasslands that stretched 4 miles. She was tough, quick-witted, and didn't seem to care that most of the girls didn't like her. I distinctly recall the date, April 11th, 1998, a Saturday, with my mom on the phone with my Aunt Leo and my dad having already gone into town to pick up parts for his truck. It was still a little chilly in the mornings, but mild enough to be outside in a sweatshirt. Appeared on my porch at around 9 in the morning, sporting an old Letterman jacket that had belonged to his older brother and a beanie. "Are you ready?" He didn't even try to specify what he was asking for. "Yeah, let me grab my bag," I replied. I packed a football, a pocket knife, and a bottle of water into my bag and we headed down the block to Tara's house, where she was sitting on her porch with her arms crossed. At the time, we didn't need to plan much. We'd typically just go out and figure things out as we went. The ground was soft from the rain earlier in the week, but not muddy, and after about 40 minutes of hiking, we reached the edge of the forest and emerged onto a vast expanse of grassland. She was wearing combat boots and a hoodie with the sleeves pushed up. "Finally," she said, grabbing her own bag and joining us without another word. Leo had spotted something in the distance, an open patch close to a small group of trees, and he said, "Let's check it out." So we swerved through the tall, gold-tipped grass until we discovered it. Normally, we stayed in familiar places, but on this particular day, we chose to go in a different direction. We dropped our luggage and began playing around in a clearing large enough to toss the football around. It was nothing serious, just passing the ball and running long spins, with Tara always having the finest spiral. We were in the middle of a game when Leo threw the ball to hard. I muttered, "Nice one, Joe Montana," and jogged after it as it sailed over my head and disappeared into the tall grass. I pushed through the waist-high blades, looking for the ball, when I noticed something else, a flash of dull red metal, just past the grass line. At first, I thought it was an old water tank or a tractor, but the shape didn't fit. It was a station wagon, partially covered in leaves and dried grass, with sun-faded crimson paint and faux wood paneling along the sides, giving it a very retro appearance, even for a 98. The glass was shattered, and vines coiled around the side mirrors. I yelled out, "Hey, come here." "Whoa," Leo said. "How in the hell did that get out here?" Leo and Tara raced over and froze upon seeing the car. Tara walked slowly around the car. "Not at all. This was merely discarded here. There are no tire traces or roads." "Do you believe it's locked?" I inquired, reaching for the handle of the front passenger door and pulling it. Initially, it stuck, but then dust swirled in the air, and the door cracked open. Leo smiled, and Tara shrugged, thinking it would be better to sit down than to stand on the grass. She got into the driver's seat, and Leo took the back seat. We spent perhaps an hour talking, laughing, and making up stories about how the car got there. Leo joked that it was used in a heist, while Tara said that it was probably a make-out spot some teenagers forgot. I sat in the front passenger seat and stared at the dash, which was dusty, yes, but undamaged, and still had a pair of fuzzy dice hanging from the mirror. We made the decision to return as the wind increased, and we began to grow hungry. "Let's not tell anyone," Tara suggested, "because this could be our secret spot." We all nodded, feeling as though we had discovered something we owned. The following morning, it began to rain. We made the decision to continue despite Leo still showing up at my door, and Tara, already soaking, met us at the edge of the woods. "Are you still up for it?" she questioned. "Why not?" Leo uttered those words. "We're getting close." When we reached the car, the rain became heavy, so we ducked inside. Me taking the back seat this time, Leo in the driver's seat, Tara by his side, and we ran through the trees, laughing and slipping on the wet leaves. We sat there for a bit, listening to the strangely soothing sound of the rain hitting the roof, and then I froze as my foot struck something soft beneath the seat, and I reached down to push aside an old fast food wrapper that had a clump of brown hair. When I first felt the edge of the back seat, I thought it may be animal hair, but it was too fine, too human. I saw something else there, a clean gash like from a knife, that had been patched over a little, but the stitching was shoddy. Leo chuckled, assuming I was kidding, and Tara turned back, frowning. "Why?" I continued. "I'll tell you outside." I tapped Leo's shoulder and said, "Hey, we need to go. There's hair under the seat." I murmured softly, "and a cut in the fabric, like someone hid something there." They paused, but they followed me out, and we stood beneath the trees, soaked to the bone. I believe this vehicle was involved in a negative incident. Leo's smile disappeared, and Tara's face went white. "Are you sure?" "I think so," he said. In silence, we began to make our way back. I went immediately to my dad and told him everything, saying, "I'll tell my parents. The rain soaked through our clothes, and by the time we returned to town, the sky had cleared and the sun had risen. Well, almost. I didn't want to cause trouble, so I didn't mention that we had discovered it the day before. He arched an eyebrow, but said nothing more than "I'll call the sheriff." That afternoon, Sheriff Howard came by and asked me to show him where it was. I gave him rough directions, and he thanked me and said they'd send someone out. That night, I was back at Leo's with Tara, and we were playing cards in the basement when Leo's mother came down. "It's probably just an old abandoned car, but I'll let them check it out," she added. "The sheriff's here," and we exchanged glances. Sheriff Howard stood grimly in the doorway upstairs, saying, "They found something, not just a car, a person, or the remains of one. We're going to need you kids to come down to the station tomorrow, just to go over everything again," Leo said without saying anything, and Tara sat down right away as my hands began to quiver and my stomach turned. We gave a nod. I didn't sleep that night when our parents arrived to take us up, and for the next 5 weeks, the town was filled with whispers. People avoided going into the woods, and children weren't let outside after sunset. Eventually, we learned more. The car had belonged to a Colorado man who vanished in 1995. His family had filed a missing persons report, but no leads were found. Dental records verified the remains were his. He had been killed by blunt force trauma. His wallet and identification were discovered buried beneath the driver's seat, and whoever had done it hadn't. We talked to the police twice more, but they never seemed suspicious of us. We were just unfortunate kids who happened upon something terrible. Tara moved the following year, and her dad got a job in Missouri. Despite our best efforts to conceal it, the case was never solved. No DNA, fingerprints, or weapon, just a car and a body hidden in the grass for 3 years. We stayed in touch for a long, but life took us in separate paths. Leo, who still lives in Gallows Hill and runs the neighborhood hardware store, told me once we got lucky that we shouldn't have gone back the second day. We occasionally get together for coffee, and the conversation always comes back to that automobile. I'm still worrying about the person who left the car there, how close they might have lived, how frequently they might have walked through town like the rest of us, and how they got away with it. He's true. That car had been waiting there, hidden in the grasslands. Prior to my 16th birthday in the fall, I'd always been a city kid, surrounded by congested streets, apartment buildings stacked like concrete bookshelves, and the constant hum of traffic. However, following a series of break-ins close to our building and a break-in at the store my dad ran, my parents decided they had had enough and sold what little we had. It felt like the end of the world when they packed up everything and moved us to Iron Creek, a tiny town in southern Montana that hardly appeared on a map. There was only one grocery store, one gas station, and one school that combined grades 7 to 12. And our modest one-story home was close to the town center, not far from the school. The town had a population of maybe 10,000 if you included the outlying farms. Within a week of our move, I was enrolled at Iron Creek High, and my first day was uncomfortable. Not just the typical new kid nerves, but worse. Everyone knew everyone, and they all noticed when someone new showed up, especially someone like me, quiet, awkward, and from the city. I felt the weight of every single eye on me as my homeroom teacher, Mrs. Platt, who had the enthusiasm of a lunchtime church volunteer, forced me stand at the front of the room and introduce myself. "I'm Ivy, and we recently moved here from Denver." That was all I could say before my throat shut. In the next few weeks, I sat alone at the corner table by the vending machines, pretending to scroll through fictitious texts on my phone, while I heard a few people whispering and one girl giggle. It wasn't mean, just casual, like I was a dog doing something funny, but it hurt. In our 4th period art class, which I had chosen merely to fill my schedule, I met Logan. I wasn't good at art, but it was better than nothing else. I tried saying hello to a few girls, but they always seemed to close ranks before I got more than 2 words out. I also wore the wrong shoes, used the wrong slang, and didn't know their inside jokes. Eventually, I just stopped trying. Logan, who was seated 2 seats away from me, always brought this old sketch pad that looked like it had been through a war. He would sit and draw quietly every day without ever speaking to anyone, not even the teacher, until he noticed that I was looking at his sketch pad one day. He turned the page so I could see better without saying anything. "That's really good," I said before I could stop myself. Logan looked up at me, his eyes the odd shade of grey like smoke. It was a pencil drawing of a tree, but unlike any I'd ever seen, with faces hidden in the bark, dozens of them, and shadowy figures that blended into the background like ghosts trapped inside. "Thank you. Most individuals simply find it unsettling." "Yes, it is, but in a positive sense. You're not from here, are you?" "Nope, Denver," he said with a small smile. We didn't chat much at first, just brief remarks in class, but it was something, and eventually he began sitting with me at lunch. "Big difference." "Yeah, I don't really fit in. I know that." That's how it started, though I didn't really connect with them. I was glad that I wasn't eating alone anymore. Logan, on the other hand, was always calm, mysterious, perhaps, like someone who saw the world from a slightly different angle. He introduced me to his only 2 friends, Tyler and Reed, who were both quiet, older than us, and into heavy metal and strange indie films I'd never heard of. When he asked me to come to his house one Friday after lunch, we were sitting in the courtyard when he said, "My parents are out this weekend," tossing a pebble between his fingers. "You should come by." I think I accepted his invitation because I began to feel safer around him than anyone else at that school. "I have a number of classic horror films that you were unable to stream. Where do you reside?" I said, hesitating. I wasn't sure, but then again, no one else had invited me to anything since we'd moved, and I was sick of being the outsider. "Just outside of town, like 40 minutes, real quiet farm road." "Well, that would be fun." I told my mom that it was a movie night with a new buddy, and that his parents would be home, but I didn't want her to say no, so I lied to her, but she agreed grudgingly and told me to phone if I needed anything. He grinned. "Okay, I'll pick you up after school." As we drove, the town gave way to open fields and dust roads, and I lost reception 10 minutes in. "Just so you know," he said casually, "we're off-grid out here." Logan's truck looked like something out of a 90s movie, an old blue Chevy with rust eating the edges. I didn't mention that there probably wouldn't be reception out there. No drama, no cell towers, no neighbors. "Great," I responded with a tense laugh. He grinned and said, "Sounds like horror movie 101. I returned his smile, but there was something in his tone that stuck with me. "Yeah, but you've got me. I'm the harmless type." His residence was a dilapidated ranch-style house encircled by tall grass and defunct farm machinery. It seems to have been out of date since the 1980s. Another 3 cars were parked on the gravel driveway's edge. They didn't appear to have run. It was surprisingly clean inside. Furniture made of dark wood, worn but well maintained. No signs of other people, no pets. I trailed after him into the living room and inquired, "Where are your parents again?" My brother was going to visit, but he bolted. "So I'm out in Spokane visiting my aunt. You live out here all year." We watched an old slasher movie that I had never seen and struck up a conversation. "Yeah, my dad is a welder. Mom works in town." I liked the quiet, but I began to feel a nagging sense of unease as the sky grew darker. Something wasn't correct. Logan's constant attention to his phone, despite its lack of signal, the way he abruptly closed the curtains, the fact that he locked the front door despite the fact that we were by ourselves and far from the closest neighbor. He left me alone in the living room at one point to use the restroom. I have no idea what came over. I got up and walked down the hall toward the beds, perhaps out of curiosity. I started by opening his simple, unmade bed, which was covered in posters and sketchbooks. I took a quick look inside his dresser. There was a handgun, not a replica, or toy, in the 3rd drawer. Actual. With my heart racing, I closed the drawer and took a step back. I jumped as I heard the floorboards creak. Anticipating Logan, I turned. Nothing, however, The door at the end of the hallway was ajar a little. I did not know why, but I walked toward it. Perhaps I mistook it for a spare room. Perhaps I just wanted to make sure everything was all right. I opened the door with a push. I first noticed the scent, which was like wet, rotting flesh that had been exposed to the sun. I then noticed the feet. A man's body, half covered by a blanket, face down. A dark area appeared on the carpet, close to his head. On the nightstand, I noticed a picture frame. One of the two lads is obviously Logan, while the other is older. His sibling must have been deceased. I went cold. I refrained from screaming. I remained motionless. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, so I just stood there looking. Then, behind me, I heard Logan's voice. It was not intended for you to enter. I gently turned around. To enter. I gently turned around. He stood at the very end of the hall, breathing heavily, eyes wide. He appeared dejected, irate, and hollow. I wanted you not to witness that, Ivy. What took place? I hardly raised my voice above a whisper. I didn't intend to. After getting home intoxicated, he began to rant once more. I simply lost it. I took a slow step back. I said, "You must take me home." He shook his head now. "I am unable to. I need time to work things out. Logan, you'll inform someone if you go." "You will, I'm sure." "I won't," I said, a falsehood. "I promise." He glanced down, then up again. "I do not wish to cause you harm." "Then don't. Please just let me go." He remained still. I ran. I dashed across the living room, opened the door, and rushed out into the night. I didn't hear, even though he was pursuing me. I continued. My lungs burned as I sprinted down the gravel road. At last, I paused and took out my phone. Just one bar. I gave my mother a call. On the third ring, she answered. Worried, I told her to come while crying. One provided as many references as I could. Headlights came on the road 20 minutes later. Seeing her has never made me feel so relieved. I only told her that something had happened and that I didn't feel safe at first. She contacted the police. That evening, Logan was taken into custody without a fight. They located the gun and his brother's body. Subsequently, they found unsettling sketches depicting scenes that remarkably resembled the actual events. Names were written beneath a few. I had one of them. I didn't return to Iron Creek High. This time, we relocated without bidding farewell to anyone. That night, how close I came. And what may have occurred if I hadn't glanced in that room are still things I wonder about. Small towns can also have monsters. Simply said, they are better at hiding. And occasionally, kids start by drawing you pictures. We relocated to Briar Hollow, a little community in North Carolina's Piedmont region, when I was 16 years old. You would most likely miss it if you looked it up on a map. Only a solitary speck encircled by forests, winding roads, and protracted quiet. We came out there for a new beginning, according to my mother. In actuality, the divorce had caused chaos. Peace was what she desired. I believe I simply wanted to vanish. There was no high school in Briar Hollow. I rode a 40-minute bus every morning to Averton, the next town over, where there was a merged school. Students who had known one another since birth made for an unpleasant and rocky trip. No, I never had someone sit next to me. Not until absolutely necessary. However, I managed to find two friends who helped to make life bearable. Morgan, Clara, and Reese. Their grandparents owned acreage in Briar Hollow. Thus they were frequently in the area, even though they lived close to Averton's edge. When they were both very small, Reese was adopted, but they were in the same grade. I recall my initial encounter with them. Ree was climbing the ancient windmill behind the fire station, while Clara was skipping rocks at the side of the small lake. Clara offered if I wanted to try skipping rocks as well, so I interrupted my lonesome stroll. We remained together after that. We didn't have any other close companions. On the bus, we were the type of kids that sat on the edge of the cafeteria, shared earbuds, and spent weekends exploring unnamed trails. 4 months, I harbored a secret infatuation on Clara. The kind that stays put because you're afraid of ruining what little you have. I believe she was aware, but neither she nor I ever mentioned it. It occurred on a Saturday in late September, The scent of cold pine and damp leaves filled the air. Around 10 in the morning, we met outside my house. We each had our own packs filled with snacks, water, and whatever other stuff we could need. This time, where are we going? As she brushed a flyaway hair behind her ear, Clara inquired. She was dressed in her brother's cargo pants and big hoodie. I said, back behind Harper's Trail. While walking Molly last week, I came across a side route. It makes a left cut. Beyond the ridge, Ree's eyebrow went up. The ground slopes into the ravine there, isn't it? Are you certain we won't get lost? We have Google Maps, I remarked, giving my phone a pat. In addition, we have a bag of sour candies, 2 granola bars, and 3 sandwiches. We will live. Clara chuckled. I'll be the first to torment you, if we die. It took us roughly half an hour to walk to the trailhead. The ordinary route appeared as usual. Boot prints, mossy spots, unworn soil. However, we took the detour I had discovered halfway down. The trees surrounded us, like folded arms, as it rapidly narrowed. This looks comfortable, Reese whispered. Clara teased. Don't be such a chicken. The woodlands in Averton were not the same as those in Briar Hollow. Denser and quieter. The trees seemed to be listening at times. Growing up out here makes you notice things that others don't. I know that seems silly. We proceeded along the winding trail until we came to a creek that was not marked on any local maps. The water was clear and shallow, moving like it was following an ancient trail between fallen branches and pebbles. Clara suggested that we follow it. There must be a destination, Reese said, somewhere like a dead raccoon, but continued to follow. We spent over an hour on foot. The forest altered as we descended farther. The noise level decreased. The birds stopped chirping. The wind ceased. Then we caught sight of it. Through the foliage, a structure could just be made out. Slate tiles, moss-covered roof. Clara hesitated. Is that a residence? No way, I answered, perplexed. Out here, nothing exists. No one lives this far below. Reese appeared unsure. We ought to go back, really, Clara said. If you want, you can wait here. We'll go take a short look. It's not just me standing here. Do you mean me? Together, we walked toward the home. There was no trail to it, like the jungle had grown around it. It simply sat there as if it had been dropped from the sky. The location was crumbling inward. The majority of the windows were either shattered or covered in mold, and the siding was peeling away like old skin. The front door was slightly open, inviting mischief, and hung crookly. My gut twisted for some reason. Do you guys sense that? Quietly, I inquired. Yeah, it feels heavy, Clara said, nodding. We ought to leave, Ray's murmured. The wood creaked beneath her weight, but Clara had already gone out onto the porch. Just 5 minutes, she said. Of course I did, I replied. The first thing that hit us inside was the smell, which was a combination of mildew and rot and something more that made my throat clench. The walls were yellow and wet, flooded. There was broken furniture and trash all over the place. Someone's been here, Clara murmured, gesturing to an empty can of beans on the floor. We walked carefully through the living room and then past a dilapidated kitchen, which seemed to have been trapped in time and then allowed to decay. Being trapped in time and then allowed to decay. We heard footsteps upstairs, and we all three froze. I turned to face Clara, who was pale, and she mouthed, "Go." However, before we could proceed, when we spotted him, he looked like a shadow forming at the top of the stairs. He was an elderly man, haggard, with rag-like garments hanging off his lean frame, unkempt hair, and sunken eyes. "Get out." His voice sounded as if it hadn't been used in years as he yelled. We all yelled and rushed, with Clara in front of me and Reese stumbling behind. However, as I got to the doorway, I felt a hand clamp on my arm and said, "No." I twisted hard and yelled, "Hey Isaac." When we finally stopped panting, I turned to face Clara. Clara whirled back and grabbed my other arm, pulling. Rage joined in. The man's nails bit into my skin, but I ripped free. We ran like crazy, crashing through the trees, ignoring branches that sliced our skin. "He had a knife," she said, her lip quivering. "I saw it," I muttered. I did not see it. Ray's was trembling, for we finally made our way back to the brook. My mom was upset when we returned home, but after I told her everything, she became quiet and called the sheriff. Two deputies arrived the following day, and a week later, one of them called to report that they had located the house, but it was deserted and empty. I couldn't stop watching over my shoulder. They found a mattress, food wrappers, and feces in the corner, but no trace of the man we saw. They said it was likely a drifter, but I remembered his face, that strength, that anger, and he didn't feel like a drifter. The door was nailed shut when they got there. Years went by. Clara attended college, relocated to Charlotte. I stayed behind to help my mom when she was ill, and we didn't talk much about that day until one summer, when we were all back in town for the burial of Clara's grandfather. We made the decision to return. I need to know it was real. I want to see if it's still there, Clara remarked. This time, instead of going through the woods, we took my truck and went out to a maintenance road that was marked on an old survey map close to the spot. Our hearts fell as we arrived at the location. The home had vanished, leaving only an overgrown site enclosed by a high wire barrier. There was no foundation or indication of construction, only dirt and weeds. We exited and went to the gate. Clara came to me and said, "He's gone," spray painting a warning, "Do not return," on one of the fence posts. "He must be," but I didn't think so, I said, nodding. It was late September 1996 when everything changed for me. I was 13 years old and living in a small town called Renford, tucked along the edge of the Midlands. When I occasionally feel it again late at night, when I drive past the tree I'm behind Harper's Trail. That heaviness, that silence. The forest hasn't forgotten, and neither have I my mom, and I had moved to Renford a year earlier after my dad left. And it wasn't a village, nor was it a proper city, but rather one of those forgotten in-between places with crumbling brickwork, shuttered pubs, and the smell of damp clinging to every street corner. She worked long hours at the textile warehouse on the outskirts, and I spent most of my time wandering the narrow back streets, looking for something, anything to break up the monotony. We had a faded shopping district called the Rose, built sometime in the 1970s over the ruins of old mills, and it was ugly and concrete, but it had a bakery, a chemist, and a bargain store, so people went there anyway. In the center of it was a circular, sunken plaza with steep stone steps surrounding it, which the locals called the Nest. It was the kind of place where people grew up, grew old, and then vanished without much fuss. It was a Saturday. Mom had just done her chores, and I witnessed something I will never forget. No one really knew why, perhaps because of the way the birds collected there, constantly circling, constantly observing. That day, we got our usual cheese and onion slice and sat in the Nest, as we always did, the sky heavy with cloud. That flat grey kind of sky that feels like it's pressing down on your head. Mom rubbing her ankles. Her shift at the warehouse. We didn't have much money, so weekends usually meant a shared pastry from Penny's Bakehouse and a walk through the market stalls. "Bloody boots have been pinching me all day," she mumbled, grimacing. "You should just get new ones," I suggested. "With what money, sweetheart?" she said, wearing those beige tights that always appeared a size too short and left red welts on her legs. I wish I could. He was lying flat on his back, directly on the pedestal in the center of the Nest. We had seen him a dozen times before. Everyone had. We laughed together. The type of laugh you make when you're trying to block out everything else. But he was always there, muttering to himself, asking for a spare change, sometimes shouting at pigeons. But he was harmless, just a part of the landscape. And that day, he was particularly motionless, one arm flopping over his chest, the other dangling down beside the stone ledge. His name was Paulie, or at least that was what people called him. Even though it hadn't rained in a week, his clothing appeared drenched through, and his beard was thick and crusted with crumbs and old ash. "Has he moved?" "I don't know," Mom said, frowning. "Most likely, he's asleep. Spent a lot of time there." "I believe so." When we entered, I noticed him. Whispering was going on, just whispers carried by the wind, nothing loud. Across the square, many youngsters gave him a quick look. With a cane, an elderly man made a large circle to prevent close proximity. Still, nobody took any action. The birds were the first to notice. Beside him, a lone magpie landed. Then there was a third, sitting on the fountain's ledge. I didn't give it much thought at first. There were usually magpies. There were thousands in Renford. Mom watched them and muttered absently, 3 for a girl. What? Magpies. 3 for a girl. 4 for a boy. 1 for grief. And 2 for happiness. Don't you recognize the rhyme? I didn't respond. Now I was observing the birds. Their little black eyes were staring at Polly like he was a mound of spilled chips, and their heads were tilted to one side. One of them then leapt forward and gave him a cheek kiss. Have you noticed that? My voice rose as I said. Mom narrowed her eyes. Picking a scab, probably. He always looked so dirty, you know. One more kiss, then another. Magpies started coming in, maybe 5 or 6. One pecked so forcefully that Paulie's head jerked. That's not right, Mom muttered to herself. That is just incorrect. What freezes people is a mystery. Families, children, and shoppers were all around us. Nobody made a move. Nobody hurried ahead. We felt as though an unseen entity had put its fingers around our throats and instructed us to hold off. A magpie tore a strip of flesh off Paulie's cheek, causing a high-pitched screech. Then there was stillness, shouts and screams. Someone called out for assistance. Running up the steps, a man in a blue jumper staggered back down. Oh Jesus, oh Christ, he repeated repeatedly. We were unable to turn away. I have a really distinct memory of that. As additional birds arrived, I fixed my gaze on Paulie. 10, 15. They went down like if they'd been anticipating this moment their entire lives. His face was no longer a face. It was raw and crimson. Wet tissue stuck to his beard in strings. He had lost his lips. One eye was gone. He did not recoil. He was still standing. Not once. I believe he is dead. I muttered. Mom appeared ill. Rise. We're heading out now. We sprinted up the stairs. Before we reached the street, I only made one turn. In an attempt to frighten the birds away, 2 boys had scaled the edge. Someone slid. The others simply stood motionless, gazing down at the terrifying figure of Paulie. There were no cell phones among us. Back then, nobody did. The clerk was instructed to call the police when someone raced into the pharmacy. Some went in search of a copper. There was still some patrolling on foot back then. Approximately 10 minutes later, a young cop arrived. He was youthful and scarcely older. Compared to my sibling, after one glance, he went green and hurried to the trash can to throw up. He radioed it in after that. More police arrived. First a coroner's van, then an ambulance. It was too late when they draped a tarp over the body. Everyone had already witnessed it. Everyone was aware. The birds had eaten Polly, and he was dead. There were questions later, many of them. Police made an effort to ascertain the moment of death. Paulie had been there since the early hours of the morning. It turned out. They believe he passed away in the middle of the night, possibly from a heart attack or exposure. 4 hours and hours. His body had just remained still as others passed by. The magpies were probably waiting and observing. According to other accounts, the smell of death attracted the birds. Others asserted that carrion birds react due to chemical changes in their bodies. In actuality, though, nobody really had an explanation. Nobody wanted to. If there had been a funeral, nobody was aware of it. Before it was vandalized and removed, the council painted over the dark stains, polished the steps, and put up a plaque with flowers for a few weeks. However, that pedestal in the center of nobody sits in the nest anymore. Years passed. As soon as I became 18, I left Renford, have a family and a job in Nottingham. Made an effort to forget. However, I still think about it whenever I hear wings flutter or catch a glimpse of black and white feathers out of the corner of my eye. I recall Paulie's silence. I can still hear beaks slamming on bones. We all watched, I recall, and nobody offered assistance. We didn't want to get close, not because we didn't care. Since he had a scent, since he was irrelevant, The true misery of it is that, last year, some 30 years later, I returned to Renford. The pedestal has been taken down, but the nest remains. Now it's just a level patch of concrete. Nevertheless, when I went by, 4 magpies were sitting on the edge. One appeared to be correct, didn't stir or blink at me. What if Paulie wasn't dead when they began? I wondered for the first time in 29 years. What if we didn't know what the birds knew? What if he had been lying there, experiencing everything, while those tiny, razor-sharp beaks tore him to pieces, paralyzed or barely conscious? I'll never know. However, I never again sit on those steps. Additionally, if a magpie ever lands on someone you think is asleep, they aren't. When it occurred, I was 10 years old. It was 1997. My name is Colin, and I was raised in Maple Springs, a sleepy suburban community amid in southern Illinois, the sort of area where the high school football game or the fall parade were the main events covered by the newspaper scores. Back then, there were no chain stores. We had a petrol station with a mechanical pump that you had to manually turn on, Bailey's Diner, and Joe's Grocery. My mom was a school secretary, while my dad was employed at the electric cooperative. Individuals waved to one another. The front doors remained open. The neighbors would assist in finding a lost dog. We were quiet, dependable, and nothing extraordinary. It was the reason it was so difficult to comprehend what had happened. The house next door was the starting point. The Hoffmans relocated in the spring of '95 into the house next to ours. Dennis and Carol were in their mid-40s, just the two of them and their dog, an elderly beagle named Buster, without any children. The week they moved in, my mom brought over some banana bread, and I recall Carol, wearing a white t-shirt and denim overalls, standing on the porch grinning as if she was at a loss for what to do with the generosity Dennis kept to himself. I seldom ever saw him without a cigarette, and his voice sounded like that of a smoker. Perhaps he worked night shifts in shipping or maintenance. According to my dad, he was courteous, but didn't say anything. Of the two, Carol was the most gregarious. She talked to my mom over the fence while hanging laundry, took great care of her garden, and always offered me peppermints when I accidentally delivered her mail. Despite their pleasantness, they tended to keep to themselves. No church, no local gatherings, no barbecues. I didn't give it much thought when I was 10. People simply differ from one another. However, they constantly seemed to be surrounded by a curtain. Then one day they simply vanished. October had just begun. Every front yard looked like a postcard as the leaves had just begun to turn that flaming crimson orange. When I noticed that Buster hadn't barked in a few days, I was outdoors with my friend Lucas, throwing a football. Buster never stopped barking. That's what initially caught my attention, the stillness, not the people. That evening, as my mother was preparing chili, I brought it up to her. "Hello, Mother. Have you recently seen Mrs. Hoffman?" "No, not for a few days." "Now that you bring it up." When my dad checked the following morning, their car was still in the driveway. A Ford Taurus, drab blue. It was still there. Mom tried calling them on the 3rd day. No response. She knocked on their door on the 4th day. Nothing. She phoned the police on the 5th day. The same afternoon, the officers arrived. I recall them pacing the house, rapping on doors, and looking through windows. Eventually, they pushed through the back door. They introduced Buster. The poor puppy was covered in his own muck and appeared thin and afraid. However, he was still alive. They contacted animal control and gave him water. Things became strange at that point. The interior of the house was locked. No notes, no packed bags, no blood, no signs of fight. The Hoffmans simply vanished. The news was like a kick to the throat in our town. I recall my teacher whispering to another teacher in the hallway as I was seated in class. My parents forbade me from after dusk play outside. Our front door was secured at night for the first time in my life. "Maybe they left in the middle of the night," remarked a neighbor. "With no car," said another. "People don't just vanish," another person whispered. The void was filled with rumors. Some claimed that Carol had a brother in Indiana, and that they may have fled for their lives. Dennis had debts from gaming, according to others. Some muttered about domestic violence, suggesting that one of them may have killed the other and run away. Lucas had the most outrageous theory. They were government spies who had been killed in a covert operation. That was not something I bought, even at 10 o'clock. In actuality, however, no one was aware of anything. For years, the house remained unoccupied. Nobody took up residence. The yard was not mowed. The police would occasionally return, conduct a new search, or follow up on a tip, but nothing ever came of it. The Walsh family on the corner adopted Buster. Despite his advanced age, he remained amiable and occasionally stopped by our yard as if nothing had changed. However, everything was different now. I no longer felt secure. The town has lost its sense of reality. My parents never got along. They used to let me walk to the corner store by myself, leave windows open at night, and engage in unrestricted conversation with their neighbors. That came to an end. All of us felt a little more terrified. When I was 18, I moved out. Work, marriage, and college. However, I would still go to my parents' house every year, and each year I would get a sick feeling as I looked at that empty shell of a house next door. The shutters drooped and the siding peeled. Through the driveway's crevices, grass grew. The stillness, however, was worse than all of that. One summer I got wasted with some old school pals, including Lucas, when I was 27. "You still think about the Halfmans?" I responded. Lucas fell silent. His euphoria quickly subsided. "Yeah," he responded at last. "Then it happened 2 winters ago. I drive by occasionally just to see if anything has changed, but it never does. Around 9:30 p.m., my dad gave me a call. Tight voice. "They're excavating in the Halfman residence yard," he said. "What, officers? There are lights everywhere. They brought dogs from cadavers. That weekend, I took a car down. They roped off the yard. Cliques of neighbors watched. According to the police, the inquiry is still ongoing. The news that someone had come forward quickly spread. One individual claimed to have worked with Dennis in the past and to have known something, but to have been afraid for years. We never found out what they had discovered. It was rumored to be bone fragments found beneath what was formerly a compost pile, the back corner of the yard. Nothing has been verified. There were no arrests, but after that, something changed. Conversation resumed, albeit nervously and discreetly. The fact is, we might never find out what happened to Dennis Halfman and Carol. Perhaps he fled after killing her. Perhaps someone else did. They might have been taken. Perhaps it was something more sinister. Something that had been hidden for years in the quiet of a little village. However, their absence ripped a hole in both mine and our town's fabric. It was the first time I ever realized how unfair the world was. Because logic isn't always followed, that occasionally people disappear and are never found again. I never got over that fear. Not when at night I shut my doors. Not when I pass a peaceful home with blinds that are always drawn. Not when there's silence after I hear a dog barking next door. My folks downsized to a home in Springfield a few months ago to selling the house. I took one final look at the Halfman house, still empty and still decaying, from their old porch before they went. However, a section of earth behind it had been excavated and reclaimed, leaving just new grass as a mark. As I gazed at it, I briefly believed I caught a glimpse of Buster's tail wagging in the corner of my eye. However, it was only the wind, so I departed. However, I will always be curious because in places like Maple Springs, where nothing ever occurs, when it does, it never truly disappears. It began on a dull Tuesday, the kind that passes by without you noticing, unless something noteworthy occurs. And it did for me. Unless something noteworthy occurs. And it did for me. It was illogical. It didn't feel right. The green sedan was already leaving the lot when Ryan's eyes tightened and he turned to look. He said, "You didn't get in, right?" I responded, "No," still trembling. "All right, clever," he whispered. "They'll ask for assistance with something stupid, and once you're inside, that's it. I've seen it on the news. You were about to get snatched." What? Nobody steps in, the door closes, and the car leaves. But there were people around, I said. It might have been observed. They would have aided, isn't it? Ryan gave a headshake. Not in this place. People hardly want to look at each other, much less act heroic. The cops were not called. In reality, nothing had occurred. The worst thing was that, how near something irrevocable it was. However, there was very little proof of any criminal activity. We returned home. That night, I didn't get any sleep. Days later, I kept playing the scenario again and again. But what if I had accepted? What if I was alone with the first man and the second guy never showed up? What if there had been no lock on the door? That's when I started carrying pepper spray. When you pull the pin on the tiny alarm that Ryan got me, it screams. I never left, not even to the store across the street, but alone for a long time. Every time a stranger looked at me or a car slowed down close by, my heart raced. The near miss wasn't the only thing that bothered me. It was how simple it had been for them to attempt it in front of witnesses in the middle of the day, as if it were nothing new to them, as if they understood human nature. The way ladies doubted themselves, how we don't want to overreact or be impolite. That day, I gained knowledge. Not all frights occur at night. Not all monsters conceal themselves. Some people are waiting for you in the sun, resting against a car, pleading for assistance while maintaining a composed expression. And sometimes a single phrase can save your life. No, however, I'm still plagued by the question of how many didn't somebody say it? Somebody say it.